listening to Making, a podcast by Bonsai Creative that helps creatives in film get where they're going faster by sharing the advice, knowledge, and insights of professional creatives across the film industry. I'm your host, Chris Barkley.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexis Gambis, and I'm a writer, director, and also a biologist. You may know me for the film Son of Monarchs, Hijo de Monarcas, that recently premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. But in addition to that, I'm also the founder of the Science New Wave, which I'll talk about. And I'm also the founder of a film festival called the Imagine Science Film Festival. And right now I'm working on a few films, but the one that is kind of next in the pipeline is about a indigenous activist that sort of befriends a biologist to resurrect a jaguar that lives in the Amazon. And hopefully we'll be shooting that soon, and super excited to be here with you for this conversation.
Alexis Gambis, welcome to the Make It podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. I'm just pumped to have you on. You are a true multi-hyphenate. You do a little bit of everything, and you come from a brilliant perspective. Let me give the audience a little bit more perspective on who you are. I'm going to read a little bit from your bio. Alexis Gambis is a French-Venezuelan filmmaker and biologist. His films combine documentary and fiction, often embracing animal perspectives and experimenting with new forms of scientific storytelling. In 2008, he founded the Imagine Science Film Festival that recently celebrated its 13th year of showcasing science in film from around the world. In 2016, he launched the sister portal Labocine, and we'll talk about that a little bit, coined the Netflix for Science. The VOD platform provides a virtual ecosystem to experience science cinema. That's so... Science cinema, you heard that right, in all its flavors by hybridizing forms and fostering a dialogue between scientists, artists, and educators. And I want to start with a quote you have to get us into that realm. Again, you've created the Netflix for science, if you will, with Labocine. So let's start with a quote. You said, "I've always been interested in depicting scientists because I feel like scientists are artists." Tell me how scientists are like artists.
Well, that was a mouthful. So let's break it down. Yeah, scientists and artists have similar, I always felt that they have similar minds because, being a scientist, they both kind of share this passion, and there's kind of this idea that when you do science, you don't fully understand what is the end goal. It's kind of like the pursuit, the process. There is kind of this idea of trying to understand how life works. When you're a researcher, you're kind of in the lab trying to dismantle and understand like the building blocks of life. You're trying to understand something so philosophical. And I think that art is similar, right? You're trying to do that through, whether it's painting or writing. I mean, art is, for me, we have those two words, but for me, they're very similar. And I feel that my training as a scientist actually helped me become a filmmaker because it showed me how to be patient. It showed me where to examine and observe things. It's also very humbling to be a scientist because you're faced with these monumental questions about how your body works, how cells work, and you're observing other humans or other animals. So, I feel like sometimes people tell me, "Oh, Alexi, how did you switch? How did you go from being a biologist to?" And to me, I never really switched. It's kind of, to me, those two worlds really came together, and I now exist more as I document and I make stories around science, but I still consider myself, I often refer to myself as I retired at a young age from being in the lab, but my training as a biologist really informs, my movies and everything that I do. And yeah, so that's kind of how I see those two worlds.
That's a beautiful answer, but I do want to stick with the part that you said, how it became in this switch, biologist, filmmaker, but maybe it happened before then, because I noticed I was watching your film, The Fly Room, and then I watched full disclosure, I've spent the last week just deep end of the pool of the world of Alexis Gambis. Okay. So I've watched everything you've ever made and read everything you might have said. So I've watched all these shorts, and there seems to be a reoccurring theme of father and child. So what role did your dad play in your love for film? Is there something there?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the things, what's amazing about film is that it's very unconscious, right? You make the films and then you watch them and you realize, oh, those are the patterns, and that's what I'm trying to kind of take out of myself, and it's almost like therapy, right? Because you make them as a way of as a mirror image of who you are. But my father is an artist. He's a painter. He raised our family with his artwork, but before becoming a painter, he was an engineer. So already my father was kind of a reference in terms of, I remember growing up, he would help me with my math work as like a teenager, but he made a living as a painter, and it was remarkable because he actually supported the whole family. I went to college through his paintings and artwork. Wow. And there was a bit of like a rebellion. I rebelled a bit against it because I didn't fully understand who he was or what he was doing. So I never went, as a bratty teenager, I never went to his openings. I was very much against it. I was like, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to see you perform in front of like a group of people. But I realized that, that theme comes up a lot in my film. It's, and not only father, son, but also kind of parents, in The Fly Room, it's about a little girl and her father. Mm-hmm. And I'm making a film actually about my father now, which is much more kind of directly about him. But I'm really interested in kind of how, especially when you're working in a lab, how that reflects on your identity, who you are, where you come from, your family, your origins. That's something that is really interesting to me. Is like you may be in a lab trying to understand something, but it reflects on your own identity. So yeah, my father, and it's a relationship that I'm still trying to fully kind of understand, because he has kind of these multiple identities, right? He's my father. He's an artist. He's also kind of a bit of a performer at times. And yeah, it is a big theme in my work for sure.
It reminds me of a friend I have in town, and I won't say his name, but he is a filmmaker and has had some pretty great success. But his father was uber successful and is sort of a legend. And he's always confronted with this paradox of, I know that I've been given opportunity because of my birthright, so to speak, but I also have this resentment because it would have been great to have a dad at home, because his dad was so successful, he wasn't there a lot. Right. He was always, on one hand, you're benefiting from all the hard work, the father did. And at the same time, you almost resent the art that took him away.
Yeah, it's true. And I had a bit of that. Yeah.
And the only way to express it is through art, because you can't, when you say it out loud, you risk sounding petulant or spoiled. But when you put it in art and the metaphors that film, for example, can create, you can express it in a beautifully accurate way. And I think you do that a lot in your films.
It's also a way for me to communicate with him. Now that we're speaking about that, it's, when there is a bit of that barrier and I'm not able to reach him, well, the art makes it, it's almost like a way for me to communicate with him. And it's interesting you say about father. I mean, I grew up with a father at home to some extent because he was a painter. So he worked at home. And that was also, and then he would leave for periods of time for his shows. But yeah, I also never had the concept of like a parents that actually had jobs,
Mm-hmm.
they worked for themselves. And it was, even today, the idea of working for like an institution or working for, I know that that's very privileged of me to say that, but I don't have any reference to that. So it's, but I do think that it is a way for me to communicate with my dad. And I know that my dad also is inspired by my work as a scientist and as a filmmaker. It comes out in his paintings. I've seen it. He's painted butterflies and insects and rats. And so all of that is coming out. And I know that it's kind of, it's like almost like a feedback loop.
Yeah. You guys are communicating to each other through your art.
Yeah. Like telepathic communication, because it's sometimes hard to communicate in words. So
I love that. I love that. So you came up in it and you're making, you've made this transition. It's not even really a transition. You're sort of in that space now, but I'm curious along the way, what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome as a filmmaker, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I think, the biggest challenge for anyone, I mean, especially in the arts, is, everybody wants to box you. Everybody wants to put you in a specific, this is what he does, or, so it was hard initially for me to say that I mean, even today, to call myself a filmmaker or writer, director, it's like an odd term, but I noticed that whenever you do something, there's always a tendency, and I understand it, because people want to understand who you are. So they want to categorize you. They want to like label you. Oh, he makes movies about insects, or he makes period films. And then I made Son of Monarchs, and it's like, oh, actually, he also makes films that are a little bit more maybe commercial. And so I'm always trying to break those boxes, because I'm also very interested in kind of challenging stereotypes, right? And I remember when I finished my PhD in biology and I went to film school, I had a lot of resistance from the science community, like, why are you going to film? And then when I was in the film program, people were like, oh, he's a scientist, he doesn't know what he's doing. And so I think that's been a big challenge. And of course, how to balance, doing my art and also kind of running other things that I do. But I feel like I'm a little bit like oversaturated, because I do so many things. But I feel like in addition to making films, it's really interesting to curate films and kind of educate people around these topics, because I feel like it becomes like a cohesive me, that if I only spent my day just writing and making films and directing, I wouldn't be complete. And also because it takes me like a decade to make a movie. So I have to fill in the gaps in between that. But I think that, to make it long, to make it, yeah, it's a long answer, but I think the big thing is kind of breaking out of those stereotypes and those boxes.
Yeah, film is a fascinating business, because in many ways, it's no different than any other business you would go into as an entrepreneur, but you don't have the upside of a product that is commodity. You can't be a commodity. You can't just like quickly, you can't make a $1 widget and sell it for $4. Like it's a reversed model where the product costs more than what the consumer would pay for it. And because of that, you don't get the at-bats you need, right? So as a filmmaker, you still need to find, product market fit.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And to do that, you have to fail a bunch of times. So if I have a normal business, I get to say, oh, they didn't like the candy bar with the nougat in it. Okay, let's put peanuts in it. Okay, now they kind of like the one with peanuts a little bit more. Why don't I put nougats and peanuts in it and then see if they like it? Oh, that's the one. That one sold. Yeah, right?
Like troubleshooting or adapting. Yeah.
Yeah, and with film, you actually need the same amount of at-bats, right? That's why you get a great, talented sort of auteur filmmaker and they hit their third film and all of a sudden you think they're an overnight success. But what really happened was they made all these short films. They made 2 other feature films you never heard of. And then they figured out, oh, this is my voice. This is what the audience is responding to, right? And then like people that watch Aronofsky, they go back and watch Pi. They didn't know about Pi before the other films, right? But you can kind of see elements of like how that was going to work even when he shot Pi. So I think you're on that same trajectory. It's like, well, how do I get people to respect and understand real science, and still make something entertaining and fun to watch? So it looks like Son of Monarchs might be that thing. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but I want to go back to The Color of Time, because this was an interesting film.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
No, I was just going to say that, just to add to that, I think that that film is like a muscle. You need to keep doing it. It's like biking. You need to keep. And I feel like short films and all of these things that I do, I always kind of make short things because I need to always be kind of keep it alive, right? And it's interesting because a lot of people actually refer to this Son of Monarchs as being my first film, and I'm like, well, no, I've been making films for like 10 years, but it's an interesting point how all of this work kind of comes up to the surface when you have a little bit of success. But success is also such a ephemeral thing, right? It's like a wave that comes and goes. So I'm also very, very well aware of it. And at the end of the day, if I can ride that wave, if I can kind of surf that wave and to help me make my next film, that's all I really need. But yeah, and to come to Color of Time, and I'm not only interested in science. I feel like science, there's like a limitless amount of topics that I want to tackle, but I oftentimes think that science is kind of like the music in my film. It's kind of like in the background, and I treat it as music. I don't make it about the science, but The Fly Room is about like an important science, but ultimately it's about a father and a daughter, right?
Yep.
And so Color of Time, Color of Time I was in film school. I was in my third year. I was with James Franco and that crowd, and he selected 10 filmmakers to adapt a kind of a collection of poems by this American poet C.K. Williams into a feature, and we would each adapt kind of a poem into a short film. And that was kind of my first experience working on a feature film and working with other filmmakers. And it was a great concept, right? Like 10 filmmakers have to come together. We have to figure out how it all fits together. And it was also a great opportunity to work with James Franco and Mila Kunis, and a few other actors that were Henry Hopper, who's Dennis Hopper's son. But I also I also got to work with Jessica Chastain. I mean, it was a remarkable experience because I shot my film, but I was also helping others shoot their films. So it was Zach Braff, all these amazing actors.
Zach Braff was in it. That's true.
Yeah.
You had an incredible cast in that movie. And when I approached it, I thought, oh, this is going to be like Four Rooms,
right?
Where you had 4 different directors, shooting a room, and people think that's a Quentin Tarantino movie, but he just did The Last Room, and
exactly.
And then you find out, well, wait a second, there's like 10 to 12 directors on this, and 10 to 12 writers on this. So how did it work? How did you manage? I've seen some film sets go sideways with lesser egos. So how did you manage all this?
Well, we were at NYU for a big part of it, like kind of. We had workshops where we would talk a little bit about, how they would all fit together. There was kind of an order in the actual poems, like how the stories fit together, because they were different. They were these autobiographical pieces. They were basically short poems about different stages of the poet's life, from being a kid, a teenager, a young adult, like an older adult, which was played by James Franco, and then the real poet, C.K. Williams, who sadly passed away a few years ago, also appears in the film. And so we, it was an interesting, it was kind of like also my foray, like me understanding like this idea of, working in a bigger group on a film where you only have like one piece of the puzzle. And I love that. And I thought it was really interesting. And so we all shot like test films. We made the films with like other actors. And then we all flew to Detroit because James was shooting Wizard of Oz. And he was the wizard. And so on his off time, he was shooting this film with us. And it was great. It was a great experience. And it took some time to figure out kind of the editing of it. But yeah, and my short story is called One of the Muses, and it's basically about James Franco, who's the poet in his 40s, that has a big poetry reading, and he's preparing for it at night with a tape recorder, and he listens to his voice, and he starts imagining his mother and his own kind of younger years, and all of the insecurities start appearing as shadows in the room. Actually, it starts the film. The feature film starts with James on the tape recorder. And then at the end of the night, he goes into the room, and there's Mila Kunis, who plays his wife, and she's like, "What happened?" He's like, I had a crazy night of memories. And so that was my piece. And yeah, it was kind of broken up into pieces and distributed into the feature. But yeah, it was a really amazing experience to work with also my classmates, who were great. Yeah.
For young filmmakers listening, what is the benefit or upside of doing a test shoot with stand-in actors?
It's a good point, because I teach film. I'm a teacher at NYU, and we speak a lot about these things. I feel like now with the digital age, I feel like it's important to shoot content before making a feature. And I also do it with my feature films. I shoot like a short version of it, because it helps people understand what you're trying to do. And it also helps you experiment. Like, okay, let me try this idea. It's a little bit far-fetched. It's about like two clowns that are going to be butterflies, like traveling through. Let me try it. It's a short film. There's no like pressure. And let me see how it goes. And then I can pull it back. I can show other people. And then there's also I can use it to raise money. I can use it to get people to come on board. I can try to get actors. So I think it's really important to shoot, in addition to, a portfolio, like a mood board, a visual deck. I think having a short film or having a test shoot really helps you think about certain ideas, because there's no pressure. When you shoot a feature film, it's like a beast. It's like there's like 50 people on set. There's pressure. There's people screaming at you, and so it really helps me kind of get a sense of what I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I've always admired golfers for that reason. You have the whole, not just the TV audience, but you've got 1,000 people waiting for you to whack the ball.
Oh yeah,
and you can't miss. And it's like, how do you not even think about missing this little ball that you have to swing at? So
I used to play tennis, and I had to stop playing professional when I was a teenager because of this anxiety. I couldn't do it. I couldn't work on anxiety of that match point.
It reminds me of my first piano recital. I think I had to play Bad by Michael Jackson or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And at home, I had it down. And then when I got there and people were watching and my parents were there, I just shat the bed. It was, and it was on tape. So, somewhere there's a film of me just really not even getting it. You can't even tell what it's supposed to be. It's that bad. So this is very true about the anxiety. And look, you've kept this practice up. I watched a couple of shorts where you were doing disposable robot.
Oh yeah.
Where it's like you're just doing test screenings of like you in this cardboard box robot head. Yeah. And the beauty of it, the fun of it is that's a silly little test thing where you're like pretending to talk and you're doing some different things with this robot head on. And then you watch the short film that came after, and it's like this beautiful metaphor for getting broke up with, is at least how I took it. Yeah. And it worked. I was like, oh, that connects. No, he tested it. It worked out. And then he shot the thing. So yeah, kudos. And I appreciate the insight. I think that's very helpful. Another thing that's helpful a lot of times for independent filmmakers is going about sort of finding funding and how to fund things. Should you pitch first and get someone to pay, or do you get angel investors and then make it and try to get the money on the back end, make the film that is, and make it on the back end? So with the Fly Room, you had the Hollywood Foreign Press Association and Spike Lee's production fund. How did you get involved in that? How did you get access to the Hollywood Foreign Press Association and the Spike Lee Production Fund?
Yeah, so the Hollywood Foreign Press Association was a grant that I received from them, which I think was part of the NYU, because I went to NYU Film School for my for my master's. And it was a small program. Actually, right now it's been in the news because all of our friends just got the Oscar, like Chloe Zhao for Nomadland. These are all people that I was in film school with. So it was a big, it's been a big year for NYU because the producer, Molly Asher, she won Best Picture. Chloe won, Best Director. And then also Shaka King, who did Judas and the Black Messiah, is also, he's also an NYU guy and he was kind of the same time as me. So I think I got it from there, because there was a few kind of opportunities as your thesis film, and I received that support, so that was amazing. And then Spike Lee has been kind of my mentor, and I simply adore Spike because he's always been kind of this unconventional, he's just like, do it, and he, for some reason, he was also really interested in the science. And I remember at the time he was working on a film about a kind of like an African-American physicist who wanted to create a time travel machine. He's always been super interested in science. And I remember we had weekly meetings with Spike, and he would say, like, just show me what you got and then we'll speak. He was also like fully night with Knicks. He was like orange from head to toe. He would always be like going to like a Knicks game like an hour later. And he really helped me for not only for Fly Room. I remember that I gave him a drawing of a fruit fly, and he put it next to like a Patrick Ewing like photo that he had, and I was like, oh my god, Spike Lee has like a fruit fly in his office. He gives out this like fund, this production fund, to also third-year students, and I got it. And he was also helping me, just get more exposure for the film, and also helped me with Son of Monarchs. He was involved. I went to see him, at the time when I was writing it, and he was telling me how I had to make it a little bit more political. And, he never referred to Trump by his name. He called him the orange.
The orange one.
The orange one, yeah. So he would never refer to him. But yeah, he was always super helpful. And actually, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to see him to show him the final movie. But yeah, that's how I received the funds, or that's how I received the grant. But I think, to answer the question about funding, it's really tough. And I think as independent filmmakers, you have to be really good at finding ways to raise money, because you can't wait for grants. I mean, you have to make your film at some point. Mm-hmm. And so which I can talk a little bit about. I mean, I've been really always thinking about, okay, how can I make this? Like, where can I find money that's maybe not your typical places? And how do I keep creative control over the movies that I make, which was really important for me. So yeah, I'm happy to speak a little bit about kind of that world that I navigate. But you have to be an entrepreneur in the world of making independent films, because it's super tough to raise money for films. So
yeah, I totally agree. You touched on something that some in the audience may not have a background on if they haven't followed your work. You mentioned that Spike Lee put a fruit fly on his wall next to Patrick Ewing, and you're quoted as saying, "We owe fruit flies a lot." Tell the audience briefly why we owe fruit flies so much.
Yeah, so I spent most of my 20s looking at fruit flies under the microscope. That was kind of like my, between going to parties in Brooklyn and, living in New York. During the day, I was looking at fruit flies under the microscope, because most of my research was using flies as a system, as an animal, to study cancer and study, different types of human disease, human development. And it's an animal that we owe a lot to, because most of what we understand about our genes, about our genetics, comes from fruit flies. Everything, the basics of what we understand about our cells and our body, we owe it to research that was done on fruit flies at the beginning of the 20th century. And it was done in a room at Columbia University that was known as the Fly Room. And the guys that worked in that room were known as the Fly Boys. And they were these like very kind of hip. One of the guys was kind of like a James Dean type guy, like believed in free love, hung out with artists in New York City in the 20s.
I believe in paid love.
Yeah, not even, yeah. So he was a crazy guy. I mean, he died of syphilis from all of his crazy stories. But I wanted to make a movie about the fly room because it's like such a weird story, like these guys that were working in the lab that kind of basically are responsible for modern genetics. And right now, in the middle of a pandemic and thinking about all these things, I mean, if it weren't for these guys, we wouldn't be creating these vaccines like Pfizer vaccine based on RNA and all this.
Yeah.
So I think that that's why the fruit fly, the fly room was my thesis film at NYU, and I was working on it during my last year at NYU, and I was working on it with Spike Lee. So I would show him I was shooting short films and I was interviewing the daughter of one of the scientists who was portrayed in the movie, and and he was just like so into it, and really kind of told me, he's like, just shoot it. He's like, just shoot it. And so I went on and filmed it with whatever means that I had at the time. So
yeah, it was a fascinating look into that world, and I follow and understand CRISPR. And I don't think even before I saw your film, I understood the role that fruit flies had played to get us to that point. And so thank you for that background. And we'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. But your films do sit sort of at this confluence of art and science, but you really view yourself as a filmmaker primarily now. That's what you put out front. Is there anything else you want to achieve in biology?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I am frustrated. There part of me wishes that I could go back to research, but what's great about making films is that I get a taste of, I understand the language, right? So I can live vicariously through the characters, like in Son of Monarchs, the guy Tenoch Huerta, who is the actor in Narcos as well, and is going to be in Wakanda Forever. The sequel to Black Panther. But all the characters that I create, I live through them, and when they're doing the research, I understand how important it is to see them work, to film the process, to film these moments. So I think that every film that I make allows me to kind of enter into another field of science, right? Right now, I'm working on this film that I mentioned called The Next Jaguar. Mm-hmm. It's the field of de-extinction. I don't know if you've heard of de-extinction, but it's like bringing back animals. It's like Jurassic Park. It's basically trying to bring back animals with CRISPR. Speaking about CRISPR,
I think Kevin Kelly wants to do this really badly.
Yeah, Kevin Kelly and George Church at Harvard, and they want to bring back the woolly mammoth and all of these animals. Mm-hmm. And so it's a fascinating field because ultimately it's about tinkering with using scissors to make these changes to the DNA to recreate these animals that went extinct. And so every film that I make allows me to kind of enter into that world. But I as you said, I've kind of now, especially in the last year, I've kind of assumed, okay, I make films, and this is where, I had a moment where I was like, should I go back to science? But now it's I'm pretty in the deep end now, and have many films that I want to make. So being a biologist, I am one through the characters that I create.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned Son of Monarch and our Sons of Monarch, and that's the film we want to talk about now because that's the one that's going through the festival run. And it's not just going through a festival run, it's having immense success. And so before we get into what it did at Sundance and what it did at Seattle and what its trajectory is going to be, tell the audience what the inspiration was behind Son of Monarch.
Well, it's my second feature, and it's kind of a semi-biographical film. It's kind of my life, a little bit.
Oh, wow.
It's the story of a scientist that lives in New York, and a Latino scientist, a Mexican scientist, who works in a lab trying to understand the genetics of color and patterns in butterflies. But then he receives the news that his grandmother died in Mexico, and he returns back home. And it's the story of this man who doesn't really know where he belongs, whether he belongs in this country where he's, living now in the US, kind of an immigrant there, but how he relates to where he comes from, feeling a bit estranged from that world. Mm-hmm. And then the one thing that connects these two worlds is the butterfly, because he works on it in the lab. And where he's from is also kind of the butterfly haven. It's where all the monarch butterflies arrive every year from their long migration. So the monarch butterfly becomes a symbol for having multiple homes, not being from one place. And I think that it's really important to make films that embrace the fact that we, and it is my story, it is your story. I mean, we were just speaking a little bit before. We come from multiple worlds, and we feel like those worlds are home, but at the same time, we feel like a stranger every time we enter those worlds, because everybody always says, oh, in my case, it's like, oh, you're not French, you're American. And when I'm in the US, I'm French. And when I'm in Venezuela, So that's the story. And it did happen to me. I was studying in the US in a lab, and it was kind of like a very meditative place. My grandmother died, and I was trying to figure out where I belonged. And I had a dream that I was like turning into insects. So I thought it was a really neat idea that he starts becoming a butterfly, Mm-hmm. In the film, what's beautiful is that film allows you to kind of fulfill your dreams, so things that I had imagined, I can make them become true in the film. So he literally, without giving too much away, he starts becoming a butterfly in the movie. And I speak about CRISPR and all these things. So the film has been, it's been amazing. I mean, it was a tough road because we shot luckily before the pandemic, and then we were stuck in the edit and post-production during the pandemic. But, what's been really heartwarming is how it's resonated with a lot of, especially kind of immigrants, but Latinos that live in the US. Some of the things that really resonated with me and kind of touched me was, Latinos saying like, finally a movie about that represents my story and not the typical stories that we see sometimes of, especially of Mexicans in film, like crossing the border and, and kind of some of those.
You have this metaphor you present in the film where the vein of a butterfly wing becomes a border between countries. Can you speak to that a little bit and tie it to what you were just saying about Hispanic folks and people from Mexico watching the film and loving it?
Well, what's interesting is that on a butterfly wing, there are different colors and patterns, right? And there are borders, right? There are things that divide colors, right? And when you study in this field of like understanding color and patterns, a lot of it is trying to understand, okay, why is this part orange? Why is this part white? You're trying like a magician, it's like you looking at a Picasso painting and trying to understand like, why is this painting the way it is? And color is interesting because color also reflects race, right? We're thinking about race. Like, why do we have certain colors? I mean, it's a really beautiful analogy about thinking about these broader topics about race. And something that was really interesting to me is that the way we think about borders on a wing, kind of on the macro level, is very similar how we think about borders between countries. And I wanted to make that analogy between the infinitely small and the infinitely big. And the fact that, butterflies, they can cross borders. You can put a wall, you can put a fence, you can, they fly over it. And they don't have any borders. And so, but I love making those analogies between, especially when somebody's looking through a microscope and the really small connects to the really big. And so that was something that I had mentioned, that the vein of a butterfly wing reminds me of like a satellite image of like, the border between US and Mexico, and it actually looks the same. If you look at it from a satellite image, it kind of looks like a butterfly wing if you put it side by side.
I'm going to go to Google Earth when this conversation's over and
I
check
have
that
like
out.
presentations where I show it. I'll send it to you afterwards, where I make the analogy between like looking from above and looking on a butterfly wing. So
Please do. That fascinates me. I love stuff like that. And I want to tell you that I really relate to what you said about where do you belong and trying to find the place where you belong. And for the audience, to bring them up to speed, we know that you're French and Venezuelan, but spend most time in New York. You're in Paris right now as we're having this conversation. And I think some of this audience knows this about me because I've mentioned it, but I'm Black and German. But on the German side, I'm French as well. So I've got that quarter of French in me. And there is something deep inside me that tells me that I could go anywhere and be just fine and it makes sense. But then I don't. And then then that just sits there. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm excited for the possibilities of the film.
It's beautiful because it sits in your core, right? In your genetics. Like it's part of who you are,
Yes.
And in some cases it kind of wakes up, and it's like, oh, this is who I am. This is where and I think it's really, and of course, diversity is just, I think it's just a beautiful, And I feel like it's also important to make films. Sometimes films tend to focus on a very specific, for example, they focus on a very specific area, but I feel like it's very important to make films that cross borders, that are in multiple languages also. Like, in my film in Son of Monarchs, he speaks Spanish in one scene and then he speaks English. And you see oftentimes in films, they try to force like a language. It's like, okay, it's going to be all in English. And so for me, it was something really important to be able to kind of navigate really freely between language and play. Like in one scene, he's in New York, and then the other scene, he's in Mexico. And I thought that was, and it's because that's who we are. We travel, and if I take a plane, I'm going to LA in 2 weeks. It's it is what it is. Like we have that kind of ability to kind of jump back and forth. So some of us.
Yep, that's exactly right. Promised I'd call this back because you do have opinions on this, and your films touch on this a little bit, and we're sort of at that moment right now with CRISPR. The Walter Isaacson book just came out, Code Breakers, talking about Jennifer Doudna and her great work in the field. What are the possibilities, or what possibilities are you most excited about or afraid of related to CRISPR? Well,
the story about CRISPR was that I actually got to interview, not Jennifer, but I got to interview Emmanuelle Charpentier, who's the French scientist, the other one that got the Nobel Prize, that is at Max Planck in Germany, in Berlin. And I met her. They invited me to show the Fly Room, and I got to spend an afternoon with her. And I remember this was right before the Nobel Prize. It was like 2 years before. We all knew that it was bound to happen, that they would receive it. But this beautiful like mid-40s scientist, just like really free-spirited, and I had an amazing conversation. And when we were speaking, she mentioned, what really frustrates me the most is that everybody's always contacting me with like these dystopian stories about CRISPR and about science fiction, and they want me to consult, and Spielberg and these people. And she's like, but I want people to understand that CRISPR is also something that is kind of, I wish that there were more films and kind of depictions of CRISPR and more in kind of everyday stories. And that struck me. And I was like, okay, I need to incorporate CRISPR into Son of Monarchs, and kind of incorporate it in a way that it's like, it also speaks to his identity, but it's not, I don't really go fully into science fiction. And so it was important for me because CRISPR, really deals with this issue of, who we are, our identities, and whether or not we should change our makeup, whether or not we should be tinkering with our makeup, and why we should be doing it. And should we be doing it to fight disease, or fight, or kind of enhancing certain traits? And so it's a slippery slope for sure. And so my views on it, that's why I have a debate in the film, because I didn't want to I wanted it to be kind of open-ended. There's a scene in the Son of Monarchs where the scientist and a journalist, and by the way, in the actual film, it's a real journalist. It's like a documentary scene.
Oh,
they're
cool.
debating. It's the guy. The journalist is Kurt Anderson from Studio 360. And Kurt, I asked Kurt because I know him because we had crossed paths for WNYC and studio, and I asked, can you just do an interview on CRISPR, and interview this William Maypother, who was the actor that plays the kind of the head of the lab. So my take on CRISPR, long-winded, but I think the problem that we have is this idea of who should be allowed to kind of use this technology. There are many hackers and biohackers. There's a whole movement right now, kind of a DIY CRISPR movement, people wanting to kind of sell their own CRISPR kits. And I think that it's hard for me to understand fully what I feel about it. I think that my take is that it's very dangerous because we don't fully understand what the repercussions are by kind of modifying specific genes on the overall body. But I do understand that, there are kind of specific diseases and specific issues where we can come in and kind of intervene almost like surgeons. But instead of dissecting organs, we're modifying very specific DNA letters and DNA nucleotides. It's a hard one. It's a hard one because I don't really know. My biggest issue is what will happen to the people that have been CRISPR'd. What will their, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about is, if you have been CRISPR'd, by other people and you were born with that, like what are your own rights and how do you kind of navigate the world? So a lot of the issues that I come up with is always about identity. Like, how would I feel as like a CRISPR'd? There were these scientists in China that created CRISPR'd babies that were HIV resistant. And I just keep thinking about these. They must be like 6-7 years old now. But what will happen to them when they grow up, and how would the world kind of accept them or discriminate them, or these types of questions. But I don't fully have an answer to it. I think a lot of it is about regulation and about who controls it. My biggest fear is that we see it now with the pandemic. Big corporations, biotechs, pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, these are the companies that are involved with CRISPR, and so corporations are going to be the ones that are going to be making these decisions, and it's going to be kind of out of the hands of government. So it's scary. It's scary, and I don't fully know what's going to happen. What I do know is the future, and I don't want to be kind of grim thinking about the future, but we will be living in a Gattaca, like Ethan Hawke. We will be discriminated based on our genes. We're already seeing it with the vaccine, right? People are saying that they're gonna have like a vaccine report in our passports, and so they'll know who's been vaccinated, So that's my biggest fear, is that people will like determine whether you get a job or health insurance based on your genetic makeup. And so CRISPR may be a way of fixing that, right? Saying like, oh, if I have this mutation that creates heart disease or makes me more susceptible, then maybe I should CRISPR it, and these types of things. So it's a scary world out there.
Yeah, it can be this really exciting thing or this really terrifying thing, depending on who has the rights and the access to the technology. I just had this debate like 3 weeks ago with someone. I could see the fear in their eyes talking about CRISPR. I said, yeah, but you wouldn't be afraid of it if you were able to turn off the Parkinson's gene.
Right.
The gene that expressed something, or if you were a new mother and you knew that your kid had a very high probability of Alzheimer's and they were able to de-express that gene. Yeah. So we think about it like we're going to have a super race of people with sort of hypertrophic muscles and blue and green eyes and dark skin. And there's just, and that's possible, like this other race of people. And like, but then there's also this very human part of it that it could benefit society in immeasurable ways. So, and the question around the corner we go, I guess.
who is going to have access to that as well, right? Like,
Right.
who will be able to afford, fixing a specific mutation for Parkinson, or, those are the questions of access is, and we're seeing it right now, right? With what's happening in India, they're suffering so much, and then in the States, like, they're vaccinating kids. So the inequality is going to be a tough one. But I do think that it doesn't mean that the technology shouldn't be put forward. And I think that it's, I celebrate the ingenuity of CRISPR. Like, I feel like what they achieved, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, this idea of taking something from bacteria and hijacking it for this. I mean, it's amazing. And I really celebrate the fact that they were able to create the system. And there's a lot of good things that have come out of it. So.
Right. And those that have that original knowledge, those are our new gods. So looking forward to the series of films you make on this.
The de-extinction is a fascinating one because CRISPR is at the foreground of that. It's like, well, if we are responsible for animals going extinct, we can use CRISPR technology to bring them back. And that's like Jurassic Park all over again. But it's a really fascinating topic because people believe that bringing back animals will also be a way to fight climate change because some animals are important for the ecosystem. So yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
Right. But then also, what if evolution caused extinction and you bring those animals back? Those animals are extinct for a reason, right? Like the dodo bird. Well, exactly. I think that's a bad example. I think we actually killed the dodo bird. But there are animals that just didn't make it.
Exactly. I mean, some of them, as you said, there's cycles of extinction that happen naturally. So we don't want to like mess with it too much. But I
always wonder why they didn't say, let's bring back the Neanderthal or some other version of person that was made extinct by Homo sapien.
Yeah. The Tasmanian tiger is a good one also. It's like, but that is something that I'm fully immersed in that right now. I'm writing about it. I'm reading about it. I'm like, it's interesting to see debates about it, like people pro and cons, and it's totally amazing. And definitely that's my next movie. So
I can't help but laugh because I realized that if we'd been having this conversation 30 years ago, it'd be pure science fiction. And this is happening somewhere right now as we're having this conversation. So it's funny in this whole different kind of surreal way.
And most people don't know it's happening, right? They don't know. Like you tell people, it's like a weird word. Like it's also such a bizarre word, right? Like de-extinction. It's like
de-extinction. It's like you had to invent the word. Many independent filmmakers' dream is to be accepted in Sundance, just to be a selection. You went there and you won an award. You won the Alfred P. Sloan Award. And how's your film life changed since a Sundance win? What kind of attention has this gotten you? How has your film life moved since then?
Yeah, it's completely right. It's changed everything. I mean, I have to like bow down to the power of Sundance and also thank them because, it was an amazing experience. I mean, they really brought me in and it felt like being part of a family, and they really loved the film, from the programmers. It was frustrating because we weren't there, but of course it's everybody's dream, to be at Sundance. I've sent multiple shorts and Fly Room and all kinds of films there, and rejection is part of our worlds. I get rejections every day. I think that what's changed is that I now got a little bit more exposure. People that resonated with the film are also, some of them are important figures like Eva Longoria and other people that responded to the film. The big news is that I signed with this management company called Macro, M88.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I know them. Yep.
Yeah, they're amazing. And so Macro is like my new family. They check in on me. They're pushing me to finish the script. And so I'm working with them, and I've been having meetings with production companies. So it's a different, people are waiting. It's a little bit of pressure also because people are waiting to see what I make next and want to support it. And so I'm in the phase right now where once I finish the script, I have companies that are willing to read it and potentially help me make it. And so it's amazing. And for me, that's the most important, is that I have a voice. And I feel like what's changed is that people now, because I have all of these identities, right? I'm a biologist, I run a festival. People are like, oh, I mean, he's kind of legit, type of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not like these obscure films about clowns running around as butterflies. And I think also it allowed people to realize, because my first film was, which I'm very kind of, Fly Room for me is a very personal film as well, but this one has a little bit more of a commercial aspect to it. And I can't say, because I'm vowed to secrecy, but it's going to be on a very important streaming platform in the US, and it's going to be released in the fall. And so that's amazing, because it's going to get a huge amount of exposure.
So congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And so that's happening in the background. And so that also for me is important, because the film will be seen not only by people in the festival world, but now by everyone. So it's amazing.
It's super exciting. That's going to kill, and I can't wait until that happens.
I'll let you know. I'll share the news with everyone. Yeah.
That's right. Let's proliferate this action and make it the biggest hit it can possibly be. I mentioned TED Talks early in our conversation, and we talked about that a little bit, and just how terrifying it is to be on a TED Talk. You did a TED Talk in 2019. And the first thing I thought was, wow, what a wonderful way to promote your filmmaking.
Yeah.
It's like you're there talking about science and film, but through it, you were able to promote your film, Son of Monarch. So what's the process? Is this something independent filmmakers can do? Can they find some local TED chapter and do a TEDx and promote their film? How is this a different angle to maybe promote films that we haven't thought about?
Yeah, well, I think that it's a good point. I think that when you're a filmmaker, more than anything, you have something that you want to share, right, with the world. You have a message, and I think TED is very good with that, in finding people that have very kind of passionate ideas about how, it may sound cliche, but how to change the world. Like there's literally people that are really kind of thinking about, from conservation to protein structure to, to some extent, me making films is like minimal impact compared to some of the other people that were giving talks with me at the time. But I was invited to be part of the TED Fellows program, which is basically they select around 20 to 30 kind of, emerging kind of voices that are doing interesting things. And I was part of this program, and as part of it, you kind of brainstorm with them, but you also give a TED Talk. And it taught me a lot, because it taught me how to structure a message, how to also think about, it is about my films, but it's about something bigger, right? It's about science communication. It's about a term that I've actually coined and I've been pushing for the last few years, is this idea of the science new wave. And the science new wave is based on the French new wave. The idea is that in order to make films around science, we need to make sure that science intersects with culture, with diversity, with other disciplines. And we need to break the science film. You immediately think of like Nat Geo, or you may think of science fiction movies, but there's so much of a gray, rich area of how to bring science into other disciplines. And so the science new wave is kind of like my manifesto, saying to the world, let's figure out ways to make movies about science, but that are fiction, that are hybrids and all that. So that was a platform and kind of like a speaker, to be able to do that to an audience that responded to it. And it was a wonderful experience, because I had mentors that helped me. And what I would recommend any filmmaker out there, or anybody that has an interesting idea, is to apply to these things, because if you're if you have a very strong message or way of thinking about things, and it just so happens that film is the way I do that. I think visually and through stories, but I think it's really important to do other things, similar to TED, to speak about your work, whether it's, the main TED, or it's a TEDx, or it's being part of conferences. It comes back to what we spoke about before. Don't box yourself in thinking I make films, I should only be in that world of making films. It's like, no, you're a storyteller. You have messages. You have something that you want to share with the world. And so that was for me really important. And TED really gave me the confidence to speak, about my work and kind of get a response and a huge platform to speak about it. And so, and again, it's all about, you become part of these families, you become part of the TED family, part of the Sundance family. And these are people that genuinely, I mean, I know there's a business behind it, but genuinely these people care. They want to know what you're up to. And I can't emphasize how important it is as an artist or a scientist to have communities, to have people around you that you can rely on and speak to. And, because you don't make these things alone. And it's all about community. And so, and I think that's what people are missing right now, right? With the pandemic, is like being back and being with people, exchanging ideas and all that. And that's why I enjoy doing this, because it's like an opportunity, a humbling opportunity to be able to share, right? To share what you do and also kind of self-reflect on why you do it. I think it's really important.
Thank you so much. I'm humbled as well. And I think that's wonderful advice. We mentioned earlier in the conversation, you've created the Netflix of science in Labocine. And so with that in mind, what do you think is the holy grail of science films, if you had to pick one right now?
Because I was really interested in kind of the science integrating with other disciplines, and there's so much content being made, and I run this festival, I said, there are big platforms out there, but I thought it would be nice to create a platform that brings all these films in there and showcases them through issues and spotlights. And so I created a platform, and it also allows me to distribute my own work and understand distribution. I'm really interested in kind of film distribution changing and the rising
Ditto
platforms, like HBO Max and Hulu and all these things. They're all there, and they're kind of shaking up Netflix a little bit because there's newcomers. The films, it's hard to pick like what is my favorite kind of science film. I will say that there's this film, this French film that I always come back to. It's called My American Uncle.
Okay.
And it's a film that was made in the 60s as part of it. There was a whole like science sub-movement in the French New Wave. And there's this filmmaker, his name is Alain René, who made these like science fiction stories. And My American Uncle is kind of this film about crazy scenes about people turning into rats and about psychology. And it's a wonderful film. I can't even describe it. It's so crazy, but it's about behavioral science and about how we cope with fear. And I think it's an amazing film. And of course, I'm a big fan of films like Gattaca. I think Gattaca is a film that sticks with you. And I come back to it often because I definitely respond to it. And recently at Sundance, there's this film that I really loved called All Light Everywhere. And it's about perception of light and about surveillance systems and about how the world kind of observes us. And it's this filmmaker from Baltimore. His name is Theo Anthony. And it's kind of an experimental documentary. It blew my mind. It's an unbelievable film, and it was recently acquired by Neon. And you need to watch it because it's a beautiful.
I will definitely check it out. It's the opposite of a film we were involved in called All Light Will End.
Ah, okay.
Which is a horror
I
film.
can't wait to see your films, by the way. I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, we have one called Another Version of You that you can see everywhere. And then we did Kate Upton's last feature film called Adult Interference. It's a comedy, sort of a classic raunchy 80s American comedy. That's the style of it. And or 90s comedy. And then we have All Light Will End, which is a horror, indie horror. So, so All Light Everywhere, Gattaca, and My American Uncle. That's very good. You also have the annual Imagine Science Film Festival. This year, the theme is resistance in all caps. Talk about that theme and why you chose it.
Yeah, so every year we have this festival that kind of, puts a spotlight on the latest crop of like science and cinema around the world. It usually happens in New York. I mean, it happens in New York, but right now, because of the pandemic, we've been it was virtual last year and it's going to be hybrid this year. But every year we have a theme. Last year was migration. This year it's resistance. And we love to have these kind of overarching themes as a way of kind of having people submit work thinking about those themes. And resistance is a really beautiful one because obviously we've been resisting politically. There's been a lot of resistance, a lot of movements that have kind of surged in the last year. But resistance is also interesting in terms of thinking about our resistance to the virus, resistance in our bodies, resistance as a form of expression. And yeah, it's exciting. We're in the midst of organizing it and receiving films. And it's a great event that I would love for you guys to come to because we have these amazing parties where all of these like scientists and artists and filmmakers come together and just exchange ideas. And one thing that I particularly love about the festival is this initiative called Symbiosis, where we pair scientists and filmmakers together, and they make films over the course of the week. They make films around the theme of resistance, and then we show those films at the end of the week. And so if you're like a science buff or you're interested in kind of science film or just kind of, you need to come to the Imagine Science Film Festival. And it's going to be our 14th year. Hard to believe. I started it when I was a PhD student, and it comes every year. It comes back. So,
well, if there's anything I've learned in this conversation, it's that there's nothing you can't do and accomplish once you set your mind to it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on social media or on the internet, or maybe even see your work or come to your festival or all the stuff?
Yeah, I'm always so difficult to self-promote, but you can learn more about my work on my website, Alexis with an S, Gambis.com. A lot of my short films are actually available for free to watch. But then, if you want to learn more about what I do, Son of Monarchs also has its own website, sonofmonarchs.com. You can see right now we're going to Philadelphia next. We just wrapped Milwaukee. So we're going to be at the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival. And then we have a few more festivals that are going to come up, and then the release in the fall. And then to follow kind of like more of the work that I do in terms of curating, I would go to labocine.com and just check out the films. We have like a live cinema where we showcase films. We have monthly issues. And then the festival is imaginesciencefilms.org. And that happens in October. And I highly recommend people to submit work, come to the festival. Part of it will be virtual, so you can, and it's actually going to be happening on the platform on labocine.com. So that's it. And if you go to my website, you'll learn a little bit more about the films that I'm working on, including the next Jaguar, which I'm hoping to shoot in the Amazon next year. So.
Amazing cover art on the next Jaguar as well. And thank you for correcting my terrible pronunciation. Labocine is the Netflix of science films. And and this has been awesome. We'll end it here. Your students love you. You have students that have recommended you for podcasts and different interviews and things like that. You teach a great class on on film and biology. There's no class like this, I don't think, that I've ever heard of, where you can go learn biology and film at the same time. How does it work? How do you make that work?
Well, part of what I think deeply is that in order to train, people to get engaged with science, the idea of making films is a great, the same way as you do research, you go to the lab, you like experiment, you do bench work. I think making a film is a really fascinating way for a student to kind of visualize the science. If they have to make a film about, CRISPR, for example, like how do they make it? How do they tell a story around it? And so that's why I combine film and biology, because especially when you're at that age, like 18, 19, 20, you still have like a malleable, you don't have like those restrictions, and you're open to it. And you're like, oh yeah, I'll make a film about CRISPR. And it gets people really excited about the science and also really excited about film and the potential of storytelling. And so I've been teaching a class kind of connecting film and biology. It's called Animal Perspectives. It's about how animals see the world, how we think about animals in science, film, politics, literature, and students make films every week, exercises, and we talk about their films. And I teach another class called Docufiction, which is how do you combine documentary and fiction together? And why would we do that? And why do people, do these kind of hybrid stories? And so, and I think it's important, again, all about like breaking categorizations, right? Like, and I think I love teaching because it can be draining, but it's, there's so much like idealism, and you want to keep that fire going. These kids are just amazing. And so, yeah, I've been teaching for 10 years now, and it's a good balance to making films, which is there's a lot of egos, and it's a world that can be very kind of overwhelming. So the teaching grounds me. It puts me back into my place. So
absolutely. I love that. It reminds me of a Michael Ovitz quote, young people make their own rules.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way and a great place to stop. Alexi, this has been a blast. I've learned so much.
It's been so much fun to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. I want us to stay in touch. I want to come to the film festival, and
I'm going to come to Nashville as well.
Yeah, and you come to Nashville, key to the city, guaranteed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to the team over there. And thanks for having me. I'm honored, and I can't wait to visit, and maybe to also collaborate on some stuff in the future. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's collaborate. Let's do a round 2 if need be. And you heard it right here, folks. If you're listening, go follow this man. The ascension is real. Alexis Gambis, thank you. Talk to you soon, man.
Thank you, man.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Make It podcast. To find out more information about this week's topics, including links to relevant blog posts, projects, and indie creatives, please visit our website at www.bonsai.film. If you haven't already, you can join our podcast community on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice by searching for Make It Bonsai Creative, and the show will pop right up. You now have the opportunity to support the production of this podcast. If you love Make It and are a true fan of what we're trying to accomplish in the indie film community, please visit www.bonsai.film and click Contribute. Contributions start at only $5 monthly. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Bonsai Creative, and on Facebook by searching for Bonsai Creative. You can provide feedback to us via email at contact@bonsai.film, and you can follow me, Chris, on Twitter at FlamingYourHeart. That's FlamingYurHeart. And of course, if you're looking to take a big step towards your filmmaking success, go to www.bonsai.film and click on Services to explore a variety of offerings, from keynotes and panels to pitch readiness assessments and so much more. You have everything to gain. Until next time, be better, be creative, be engaged, and thank you for listening.